Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/339, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 339th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney, and thank you so much for joining. And this is the end of the summer here, as far as I'm concerned. This was the big summer tour. This is the takeaway episode. It's a little chilly outside. I'm at the cabin now. Some of the leaves are changing. We are definitely transitioning seasons right here. And it's a great time to reflect back on this really fun, interesting, dare I say, unique tour. It was pretty cool. So we're a few weeks later from the trip itself. You've been listening to it over the course of the many weeks since then. And it was unusually successful, I think, considering the combining of have to hit transit opportunities and whatnot. So on this edition, we're going to, with the benefit of hindsight, help put this trip into perspective. And I'm going to do it a little bit different. This time I'm going to do it by day, each day's takeaway for the trip. And there were some days that were easier to find those than others. All right, day one. And by the way, this is the first day of cycling, not the first day of travel, because of course I had all sorts of interesting elements to my day zero with packing up the bike and all of that. But we'll let that go. We'll go with day one. Day one's takeaway. It's never as bad as you think, unless, of course, it is. I want to talk a little bit about the bike work that I got done before I left on the trip. I was disappointed in the way that it worked out, but I think as I've reflected on it a little bit, it's entirely possible that I may not have communicated everything in a fully 100% accurate way. So I think that I need to at least consider the fact that there was some fault from me personally as well. I thought I was pretty clear that I essentially wanted the exact same drivetrain put on there, and I thought that was the case, but maybe I didn't do a good enough job of that. So I would say that the loss of the gear inches was ultimately really disappointing. Did I feel it? Yes. Was it that big of a deal? No, not really. And that really has me thinking of a couple of different things about all of this. Let me start off with the bike shop in particular, because I threw the whole bike shop under the bus a little bit. And like I said, I don't think that it was done poorly or whatever. And I think that it could have been a communication issue that got me to where I got to. The build that was done on that bike was really good. They do really good work. I just didn't get what I think that I wanted. So I'll start off with that. And, well, I'll just leave it there. The one thing I will say, and this, of course, will fast forward to a few days later, that rack bolt shearing off, and I'm mentioning it here in the day one takeaway because I think it's relevant to the whole bike shop thing, which was much more of a day one thing. They did work on my rear rack and found that one of the bolts was completely sheared off. That was a big problem. They did fix that. And the good news with all of that is that they fixed that one really well. The other one is the one that actually ended up failing. And that is the big problem. The big takeaway from all of this was that they did a great job on what they did. You know what I mean? And I think that the legacy bolt that was in there was destined to fail at some point. And so in a very real way, they sort of saved the tour by identifying the one that was a problem and fixing that in the first place. So I do want to make sure that I give them a shout out on that, because the reality is that if I had the old bolts in that thing, I think that the whole rear rack would have eventually failed. I got them at the hardware store, the local hardware store, and the hardware store did nothing wrong. It's just that I think that these types of bolts aren't necessarily going to be all that great. They were supposed to be good. They were supposed to be strong, but they weren't. Okay. So let me say one more thing relevant to this takeaway here, which feels like it's all over the map, but I think you're following. I'm not sure if what the bike is right now is what I want going forward. However, I'm also not really sure if the lost gear inches are worth throwing out a perfectly good cassette. I've got much more time to mull it over. I mean, obviously, I've still got to fix the rear rack on the thing before I can. Actually, there's a whole host of things. I have not ridden the bike since I got back, for real. It's been like, I think 2 months now, because when I put it back together, the brakes aren't aligned right. No, it just isn't. I can't ride it. So, and that's like a simple fix. But because the rear rack is also problematic, I just have to do a whole bunch of things to it to get it to be able to ride again. And I do intend to do that before the end of the year. But generally speaking, I've got plenty of time to mull all of this over. And, to circle back to what the takeaway was, at the moment, in the moment when I was turning into camp, I was really ticked off because for whatever reason, everything was all coming at once. And the reality is what I thought was really bad in that moment was just not bad at all. It didn't end up really impacting the tour. And indeed, the ire that I was throwing really was misplaced because they also did things that effectively saved the tour later on. So long story short, whenever you're facing any kind of an issue, whether it's mechanical, whether it's not, whether there are other people involved, it's never as bad as you think it is. Unless, of course, it is. There's always times when it is as bad as you think it is. But in this instance, day one, it wasn't as bad. All right, that was a meandering takeaway. I promise these others are a little bit clearer. Day two's takeaway. Always be ready for bus racks that are broken or missing. And I have to tell you, this is a new takeaway for me because as you recall, listening to the first few episodes of this tour, I was running into some serious malfunctions and serious issues with bike racks all the way through the first few days of it. I wasn't able to put it on the front rack for the bus from Portland to Tillamook because dude had hit a deer and it was busted. There was parts of the deer on the thing. It was gross. Then also there was no rack. There was either no rack or it was broken. I can't even remember what it was when I was in Pacific City. And so running into all of this, I'm starting to realize that you've always got to be ready for the fact that you may run into a scenario where you're expecting, because the system has bike racks, but your particular bus doesn't have them. I have put a lot of eggs in baskets of particular buses, really needing there to be a not just necessarily a bike rack, but some way for the bus to be able to handle my bike. Now, that was the case in both of those scenarios and both of those first couple of buses on this particular tour. So I was lucky on that. But you do have to bear in mind that plans can get scuttled for reasons other than bus doesn't exist, bus doesn't get there, you miss the bus. You could get there on time, the bus could be on schedule, but for all sorts of reasons, they cannot take your bike. Maybe there are tons of cyclists who are using the rack ahead of you. Maybe it's broken. Maybe dude hit a deer. These are the types of things that you do have to be mindful of. And I think that what it does for me, at least, I think that if I were ever to do this kind of a tour again, I cannot, I think in good conscience, expect the luck that I had. Because there were a couple of buses that if they were full, they couldn't take my bike or whatever, that would have scuttled things. That would have set me back a full day or more. And it could have created problems with making transfers down the line. There were a few other days where that wouldn't have been as big of a deal. There were other buses potentially there. So I think that my day two takeaway is always be mindful of the fact that if you are going to be relying on transit fast forwards, that you've got backup plans, or at least what you would do in any given scenario if the bus wasn't able to take you and the bike. Because I think that is a factor that I should have thought about before, but never did. I got lucky because the buses could accommodate the bike in an alternate way. But I never thought about that before, which is probably a little reckless on my part. Okay, but fun for podcasting. Day three's takeaway. Day three. Day three was the day, if you recall, that I left my phone on the bus and it drove away. So my day three takeaway is probably exactly what you would think it would be, and that is triple check for that phone and your wallet and anything else that is just super critical for you. For me, there are two things I really need to make sure are on me at all times. And really, at the end of the day, one is the most important thing. I mean, the two things, of course, are phone and wallet. Wallet contains money, credit cards, ID, if you want to break it down from there. Phone contains everything. Really, in some ways, a phone can somewhat replace a wallet in our modern Apple Pay universe and wireless situations. You can also make a communication to get all of the things that were formerly in your wallet. You can call the credit card companies and cancel cards. You can do all sorts of different things. A wallet, on the flip side of that, can be used to get you a new phone. And if you share all of your stuff in the cloud and you can sync down from there, you might be able to even replace your phone somewhat from the jump. So sometimes, those two things can be equally helpful in replacing the other. You may recall that when I did the Florida trip, I think, was this 2 years ago or was this past year? It was 2 years ago. I lost my ID. And that became an issue on the return trip. I was fine. I didn't need it for the entire trip that I was on, but I, of course, needed it for the flight home. And let me tell you about the pat down you get from TSA here in the United States if you convince them after a lot of questioning that you are who you say you are, but you still get a very, very aggressive pat down. That was the first time I've ever had that personally, and that was no fun. Anyways, I am again on a tangent here. The phone does so much for us, for so many of us who do touring: entertainment, communications, directions, connection with friends and family. It's so important. I'll also throw another thing out there. A charger is almost as important as the phone. Recall back to, let's see, that would have been the Katy Trail tour where I left a small bag when my bike was being repaired, and it contained my phone charger. So I had only a limited amount of charge left on my phone, and I needed to conserve that. So a charger may be as important as all of these things too, because a phone without a charger is, well, a paperweight. So triple check for all these things. If it's that important to you, if not having it on your bike or yourself will create problems, if you lose these things, if this is going to create problems for you, that's when every time you're moving, you got to make sure that you run through a checklist to make sure they are. I habitually do that. They are usually in my pockets, and the phone should have been in my pocket. And I would have normally checked it. In fact, I checked for it mere seconds after I got off of the bus and realized it wasn't in the right pocket. Wallet was there, but not the phone. And that was when the bus had already pulled away too far away for me to be able to catch up to. So I did it. I just didn't do it at the right time. It's whenever you're leaving transit or leaving the restaurant or leaving an Uber or a Lyft, those are the times when you really, really need to do that. The caveat, not the caveat, but the sort of corollary to all of this, the end of this takeaway here is, for the first time in my entire bicycle adventuring life, I think I might be able to buy into the no electronics argument based on this experience. There is a good argument that can be made that I over-rely on my phone, but it does solve so many things for me. And I do like to be connected, and I do like to have that entertainment, and I do like to have my music and my podcasts and things like that. And honestly, yeah, could I bring an MP3 player? I would need more things to replace that one thing if I wanted to kind of get rid of some of my reliance on things. So but I do think I may have, and I hope that it didn't come across, but maybe I scoffed internally a little bit at the no electronics people because I really like it. That's how I like to tour. But this time when I felt really, really just alone, even though there were literally people there and somebody who handed me a phone to help me fix the problem, I really felt very alone for a moment there because it was sort of like, how am I going to fix this? How is this all going to work out? So, takeaway for day 3, triple check. Triple check before you get up and leave any place for the important things. It might be your wallet, might be your phone. For me, it's my wallet and my phone. I'm still stressed out about that. All right, day 4. Day 4's takeaway. Touring is about people more than biking. This is not a new takeaway. This is something that I think I've probably mentioned in almost every single takeaway episode I've done for every single tour. And if I haven't, I probably should have. And I want to go back and talk about day 4's long bus ride. And this was from, let's see, it was to Brookings, and we started in Bandon. And if you recall, it really exposed me to this mini community of the folks that use that transit to get around on the Oregon coast. And that included the driver herself and a bunch of the different locals, all of whom knew each other, all of whom relied on this service. And there was a friendship, there was a camaraderie, there was community. Sidebar in all of this, the community has really come up recently in some of the TV shows that I've been watching, most notably Reservation Dogs. If you have not seen Reservation Dogs, I so strongly urge you to watch it from season 1 through the end of season 3, which was the end of the run. They just finished it. All of season 3 was about community. And I really saw that here on day 4. So many of us have multiple options to move, to get around, whether it's our bicycles, whether it's our personal vehicles, whether it's utilizing our local transit. It's great to have the perspective of folks who only have local transit to rely on and don't have those other opportunities, and also to see a really, really terrific driver, bus operator, driver, use whichever terminology makes sense for you, that really facilitates the use of that. Transit does so much more than move people. And I often see when there's arguments against, sometimes it's implementing new forms of transit, like putting in light rail or something like that. And a lot of people start grousing about, well, this transit agency doesn't make a profit. I really, really, especially after this trip, this really underscored it, that I blanch at that argument, because these systems aren't supposed to make a profit. Not everything is supposed to make a profit. They're supposed to improve the lives of people. And that's something that I really ended up seeing on day 4. And it wasn't just the moving of the people. As you recall, the driver helped with the groceries for one person. And, that was above and beyond. But that was the kind of stuff that having a good local transit system can do in one's community. And that's why I really, really like using transit, because it's a good window into the larger communities that I'm traveling through, whether it's, small towns on the Oregon coast or, riding the metro in Los Angeles and everything in between. There's a whole lot of really interesting things that you see in there. But the people, I think, it was what really struck out to me, even though this has been more about talking about transit systems, seeing what that transit system meant to those folks at the absolute micro level. And it was one of my more enjoyable times not on a bike on this entire trip. And I wasn't really engaging in a lot of discussion. I was doing more listening than talking, which is fairly rare for me. It's a good thing to do from time to time. But yeah, anyways, day 4's takeaway. Touring is more about people than cycling sometimes. Day 5's takeaways. Takeaway is plural, by the way. First of all, it's definitely pronounced Newark. For crying out loud, Newark, Delaware. It just is. And the second takeaway is connecting transit systems that are meant to connect. They are pure magic. And I want to go back and I want to reflect on what Mysterious James said about how all of the small chances of failure, that if you just multiply them by each other, it's a miracle that this ended up working out. And he's totally right. But you also have to balance it out by the fact that some of these connections were very specifically designed to work. They were two agencies that ran buses in their own systems, but were mindful of the schedule for the other one. And it was meant to connect. And you know what? It always worked when that was set up. So going from Brookings, Oregon to Fortuna, California, that would ordinarily take me 2 days, or it has historically taken me 2 days. Now, some people can do that in a day, and they are from Krypton, I think, and are harmed by kryptonite and are otherwise superhuman. For someone like me, that's a 2-day trip, or it's a 2-day trip no matter what. I usually, Fortuna, that would be cutting it a little bit short for a short day to go to the Avenue of the Giants, which is what I ended up doing in terms of the ride that day. But boy, oh boy, what an incredible fast forward that was. This was the genesis of the entire idea of this trip years ago, because I noticed that, I want to say maybe during the pandemic, and it might have been right before the pandemic that I noticed that. And that kind of laid the seed for this. But of course, the bus that really, really made the difference was that fast forward, that critical fast forward from the Avenue of the Giants area all the way down, further down to Benbow, California, because that was the thing that made my day 6 the hellscape that it was. It was just short enough to be able to pull off. So in any event, the way those buses all just sort of clicked together, there were short waits between the buses left on time. They arrived close to on time. I never had a rush for a connection. I never felt like I was going to miss a bus. There were times when I wasn't sure where the next bus was, but they all did just click together. And many of the drivers were aware of that, were aware of those connections. And so I thought that was really, really great. And so I am super grateful for transit agencies that communicate with other transit agencies where they overlap, because that's just a really great benefit for folks in those communities, because you can really do this type of thing, this type of adventure, or do the crazy thing that I did when I went from DC or where'd I go? I did DC to Boston that one time. So, all on local transit. Lots of different systems. Connecting systems are magic. That is one of the takeaways from day 5. The other one is it's freaking Newark, Delaware. That's how you pronounce it. It is not Newark. It is Newark. It's Newark. It just is. Day 6. Day 6 takeaways. Zip ties are non-negotiable brings, and I'm glad I pushed myself. So these are the 2 takeaways. Earlier, I said that the bike shop saved the trip. The reality is that zip ties saved the trip. I'm not sure what my options would have been if I didn't have a sufficient number of zip ties with me at that day at that time, because I was at a KOA. Would they have had something that I could have used to have sufficiently bound that together? Did they have zip ties? Maybe they had a small shop. Maybe they would have had zip ties. Maybe someone would have had zip ties. Maybe when I could have gone around and found someone to help me. But Benbow, California, I'm here to tell you, does not have a bike shop. And the closest bike shop, I think it would be back in Arcata, maybe Fortuna, but certainly a long way back. And the only bus options would have been basically in the other direction. That was the end of the line for transit opportunities. The only way to go further south was by bicycle. And zip ties, absolutely, with about maybe 10 minutes worth of work, really ended up saving the rest of the trip. The fix was so good, I didn't even bother doing anything additional to it for the many miles that followed. That included additional buses, that included additional riding. Zip ties are magical little beasts, and they can really help you with things that otherwise would really scuttle your adventure. So zip ties and duct tape, I would throw that in there as well, although I didn't use duct tape. Day 6, and going to the next part of the takeaway was I'm glad I pushed myself, because day 6, as you all recall, it was such a push for me. That's why I did it in 2 episodes, because there was just so much going on, both with the mechanical failure and with just the physical challenge of the whole thing. That was pretty much my limit. And I know that an earlier start would have made it easier, because I tend to like to start early and finish early. I started late and finished late because of the nature of the bus schedule. And that bus was the thing that really made it all happen, because that was, I think, about 30 miles of cycling through fairly hilly terrain. There were a couple, I think there was at least 1, maybe 2 climbs of note in that. There was plenty of steep and hilly terrain to follow, of course, but that I can't imagine cycling another 2 or 3 miles, much less another 20 or 30. So the circumstances of day 6 were what they were. It was exactly what I thought it would be. I knew it was going to be a challenge. I knew that it was going to be a lot of fun if I could pull it off. And now looking back, the fact that I woke up at Burlington Campground in the Avenue of the Giants and collapsed in a heap after a mediocre dinner at Denny's in a mediocre hotel in Fort Bragg, California, that was pretty awesome. That worked out really well. Maybe next time I would end up just camping, but it was... Yeah, I still look back on day 6 and say, that was pretty intense. That was one of the more intense days of bicycling adventuring I've ever done that didn't involve weather. Well, let's take it back. Weather was a major factor, actually, because it was so hot for the front end of it, and that absolutely had an impact on my energy until really it was right around the base of Rockport Hill was where things started to get a little bit cooler and things were better at that point. But boy, what, and then of course we had wind. My gosh, you can tell I'm still processing all these months later. Day 6, zip ties are non-negotiable brings, and I'm glad I pushed myself. All right, day 7. Day 7's takeaway was about the heat. California gets hot. When you are on the coast, it is gorgeous during the summer. It's almost, for many of you, probably a little bit chilly. It sometimes tops out in the mid 50s or maybe the low 60s Fahrenheit. That's chilly for people, especially if you're coming from someplace else that's pretty warm during the summer. It's why I like to go to the West Coast, because I frankly love the escape of having those kinds of chillier temperatures. But the second you go inland, it can be really, really blisteringly hot. And that was the case when I had to take the bus inland and go through all of those towns. Just like even riding around San Rafael and those towns, it was 100 degrees. It was just miserable, especially because, by then I had acclimatized to 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and now 100 degrees Fahrenheit was just way too much. I know many of you love the heat and love to cycle in it. And I say more power to you, but I do think that this experience on this trip has me even more than ever actively choosing against rides where there's really any possibility of that kind of heat. That really is a limiting factor for me if I want to do big tours in the summer. Most of this country is hot and frankly getting hotter, So I'm going to have to start rethinking maybe the scheduling of things. Do I do more winter, spring, and fall tours and maybe take a little bit of the summers off if they're not on the Pacific coast? It's definitely something to reflect on as we get to the end of the season here. But the day 7's takeaway, California and indeed the United States and indeed the world gets hot. And it's certainly impacting how I want to approach my bicycling adventures going forward, because even in the 80s, it can sometimes, if it's really hot sun, if it's a really direct sun, that sometimes is even too much for me. I love me some cloudy days. What can I say? Final days. And of course, I ended up, as you noticed, I didn't do a lot of recording once I had ended up getting together with James. And that was because, he and I just, when we get together, he's one of the few people on the planet where we can just sit down and just talk for literally hours. And that's really what ended up happening. And it wasn't exactly podcast material. And also, James is sort of like ambivalent about being on the show, and that's totally fine. I'm grateful for the time he has been on the show, and you got at least a hello in that one episode. So there you go. My final day takeaway, though, is really about the finish line. And I think I've said this before, too. I think many of my takeaways here may be repeats, but I think they do underscore why this particular route is so special to me. When you are wrapping up your tour and your finish line is the Golden Gate Bridge, I've done this multiple times through the better part of the last 10 years and more. It is really special, and it can be one of those days where it's fogged in and you can't see more than 20 feet ahead of you. That's awesome. Or it could be a beautiful sunny day, or there could be a ton of tourists on there and you're dodging around them and everybody's getting in your way and you're frustrated. Or it could be wide open and you can just kind of cycle and glide and just enjoy the whole thing. It doesn't matter. It just is so cool to go over that bridge. It is a really, really fun way to end any kind of a tour. And that's why I've done it so many times that way. And it's just a stellar finish line. So the Portland to San Francisco 2X tour was, I think, a great success. I enjoyed it a lot. I really enjoyed all of the elements of it, even the challenging ones. I think there were some more challenging moments in this ride than I've had in a while. And like I said, that sometimes makes for good podcasting. In the moment, it's not so fun, but hey, good for the show. And I think that there are going to be some good takeaways on transit. You've heard a few of them right here. Transit is going to be a part of future tours for sure. I've already got one in mind for next year that I've already started the planning process for. You'll hear more about that in future episodes. I've actually even gone on another one-day mini tour since you last heard from me between this show and the end of the tour. So that's going to be coming up as well. No transit in that one, but there was a transit angle to it, and we'll get into it in that episode. That's for a later show. But I really enjoyed this, and I hope you did too. It's a route that I've done before. It's a route that I repeat. I hope that just because I repeat certain tours, I think that I get something different every time, and I hope that comes across to you as well. And we will undoubtedly be having wheels down on the Oregon coast and California sometime probably next year. If not next year, then certainly by the year after. It is just a wonderful route and a place I love to go to again and again. I always try to do a little bit different every time. And this one, it was different.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Lazuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsella, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Sarus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.